new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's October 26 here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and you're watching News Generation, where we discuss the latest issues concerning our generation. Joining me in the studio is Nal Song.
Good morning.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Thank you for having me.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s and share their own insights. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. It turns out that the number of books at all 10 national university libraries had exceeded the recommended amount. Some universities, like Kyungbuk University, had double the amount with over 3.4 million books. Lawmakers are currently looking into ways to better manage the total amount to reduce waste. And South Koreans are feeling less safe in regards to crimes like robbery and sexual violence. According to a public safety survey in 2022, where people were asked to rate how safe they felt against such crimes, the average score was at 83. That was down 0.4 points compared to a year earlier. And moving on to news in Israel. Israel has drafted more than 300,000 reservists to join the war against the Hamas militant group. Israeli reservists have criticized their Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his son staying in the United States amid this conflict. Netanyahu's son Yair is 32 years old. He reportedly moved to Florida earlier this year after being sued for defamation. Now, Israelis have expressed their rage over Netanyahu's son seemingly enjoying his life at Miami Beach while their friends and family members were out fighting on the front lines. And Israel's army is made up of a large proportion of reservists who have completed compulsory national service. They can be called up for duty until they reach the age of 40. Now, some who had been abroad even flew into Israel to help their country at what they called a critical time. So hearing this news story, what were your thoughts, Ki-hoon?
Honestly, I think it's bad timing and also a missed opportunity at the same time. I wouldn't know how it feels to be a son of a prime minister, but you should live with some sort of responsibility and be extra careful of your actions because you're going to live a very, very privileged life.
Yeah.
Therefore, most citizens will always keep an eye on you of what you do,
Right.
like the wrongdoings, and they'll just criticize you. They will always be ready to do that. So I think another big mistake that I think he made was he was posting a lot of things on social media,
Right.
including a lot of inappropriate political comments. So, at this time, he could have obviously chosen to keep a low key, but he was wandering around, enjoying his life, which
Exactly.
is not the best time
He
to do that. Yeah.
he wasn't doing the best being under the low radar. He showed his life living in Miami, whereas like his home country, a lot of innocent civilians out there are dying, and also reservists are risking their lives, actually spending money to go back to their home
Right.
country. Now, what do you think about this news story?
We often mention this on the show. I think the kind of the spirit of the millennial and Gen Z is you do you.
Yeah.
But I do think that if I were, even just as a Korean citizen, I am angered by this act. And like Hyun was mentioning, it is kind of insensitive that he would be posting all of these things at this time. And like he was mentioning, being a son of somebody is not something that you chose to be, but it's also where you are at life. It's what I guess life has dealt you with. And so kind of navigating that in a wise way, it would do him better as well.
It would do him better. And I completely agree with all the Israeli reservists out there. It is a critical time that Israel is facing right now with the war ongoing and the death toll climbing up on both sides. But until then, until we see more developments, that was our news feed for this Thursday. And let's switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day. My AI voice secretary will be introducing something that a growing number of to-be married couples are signing before tying the knot. To find out what that is, take a listen.
Prenuptial agreements, or prenups for short. These are written contracts signed by two people before they get married. Usually, the parties involved write down all of their property and any debts they owe. They also spell out each person's property rights during and possibly after their marriage, in case they get a divorce. Prenups are often seen as something used by the rich or celebrities. But now we're seeing more young people, especially in Korea, sign them before tying the knot, and not just about their finance or assets. Instead, young couples are writing down small details, ranging from who should do what type of house chores and what their roles will be once they have kids.
As my AI voice secretary just explained, we're seeing a growing number of millennials and Gen Z write prenups or contracts before getting married. And this has actually been more common abroad right now.
Right. I mean, we've seen this trend, but also we've been saying that it's kind of a growing trend here in Korea. But let's talk about prenuptials to start with. As we mentioned, prenups or prenuptials are basically a document which states your estate or property. So I guess it was kind of for the rich, the celebrity, to divide their assets when and if they do get a divorce. But I do think a lot of the millennials and Gen Z are not against the idea of divorce if it is necessary, and they do value boundaries, they value the personal spaces, and we have this value of individualism. So I think that's why a growing number of people are making this.
What do you think about that, Kiwon?
Honestly, I've never really thought about signing a prenup, only because I didn't really deeply think about getting married in the first place. But I think for many millennials and Gen Zs, it's a very important step to take before you really fully commit yourself to another person, perhaps for the rest of your life. And according to a survey conducted in the US, 50% of adults are open to signing a prenup. And I think one explanation could be this growing trend among younger adults, not just Americans, but also Koreans. They're getting married later in life, meaning they're more likely to have individual assets.
Right.
So I think this is just one way to kind of financially protect yourself and be, I guess, better prepared for the worst possible scenario. And also because the concept of divorce, nowadays it's become a bit more normalized and a bit more accepted in society compared to the past.
And you mentioned, like, it used to be such a common thing abroad, especially in Western countries. But now we're seeing a lot of youngsters write them in Korea. So Kyun, tell us how prenups are being used here in the country.
It's becoming very popular in Korea nowadays, but prenups in Korea actually don't have any legal force compared to other countries. So it can be only used as legal evidence to support one's case filing for a divorce. So unlike other countries, prenups in Korea can be seen as like a mutual agreement between pre-married couples to follow a set of list of things like splitting housework, taking care of the children, and even settling religious disagreements, and which Naya will explain further very soon. And I think this in turn could encourage a more healthy and understanding marriage life instead of, I guess, thinking too ahead of getting divorced. I mean, who thinks about breaking up, getting into a relationship?
Exactly.
So, I know marriage it's a big thing in life, but before you get married, if you think about, hey, what if we get divorced? How are we going to split our assets? Thinking too far ahead, like in that negative sense, I'm not sure if that's the best option, but if that floats both people's boats, I mean, do it.
I know, as long as it's agreed upon both parties, I think it's okay. And as you mentioned, in Korea, compared to other parts of the world, prenups don't have that legal effect. Maybe that's the biggest difference there. Now, would you like to explain to us, like, what millennials and Gen Zs are writing in these prenups? And also, did you write one before getting married?
Let's get into that. So while everyone is planning for their future, they're kind of wanting to prepare for every possibility. And like we said, we don't want to think about a breakup while, you're preparing for your wedding. It sounds bad, but people are saying it's kind of a realistic step to do because, marriage is more about more than just romance. It's also about realistic things that you have to deal with. So while that sounds sad, divorce rates have been going up and the odds are not always in favor for a lasting marriage. So the younger generation started incorporating more conditions, like Hyun was mentioning, into these so-called marriage contracts, more so a marriage contract than a prenup. Let's take a look at the screen. So these are kind of the list of things that people put into their contracts, I guess. For the most part, until now, prenups have been about, like we said, estates, properties, in cases of divorces because they have so much money. But these are some other categories that people agreed to sign on. So there's things like management of living expenses. Like, are we going to split them? Are you going to, use your own account, or are we going to have a joint account? Who's going to do what kind of house chores? Like, will you do the dishes? I'll cook. Or as more and more women are taking on roles outside of the homes, they're trying to split that more evenly. And whether or not you will have children, and if you do have children, who's going to take what part in raising the child? And last, in Korea, how will you support the parents? Because a lot of times parents end up living with their kids in their older ages, or they might end up in the old people's home. So kind of plans around that.
The in-laws.
The in-laws.
That's
How to-
in-laws.
Yeah, navigate that.
Exactly. So we're seeing a lot of young Koreans, though some are writing prenups and though they don't have legal effect and it really regards like assets and finances, we're also seeing a growing number writing pre-marriage contracts that involve all these different categories, whether from how to share the allowance or how to better deal with in-laws. So it's no doubt that we're seeing this type of our generation write very detailed conditions before getting married. But before continuing our discussion, let's hear what our viewers think about writing a similar contract like that before marriage. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. Let's start with Hannah. Hannah said, a prenup is like a roadmap. It helps you and your partner navigate your financial future together and make sure that you're both on the same page. It's like having a GPS for your marriage. And Tobiad said, prenuptial agreements are usually put into place when there's a large financial imbalance between the two parties. That being said, I feel that we place too much emphasis on wealth, while the most important part is that the two people can get along in the long term. Kite said, I think that those provisions are perfectly acceptable, and in an ideal world, couples would agree to them without ever making a fuss. Now here in the studio, I'd like to ask you guys the same question. I think you briefly mentioned that as long as the two boats float, it's fine, but are you for or against writing prenups or very detailed contracts before getting married?
Honestly, I'm a little against writing all these prenups because it seems too formal and somewhat businesslike between two people who merely just love each other for who they are, not what they are, how much they own, you know, their position, their title in the social hierarchy, whatever. And I mean, it is true that you don't want to be in debt or split your personal assets like once you do get divorced or if you choose to, you know, split up. However, I think being binded by so many different conditions, restrictions, I think defeats the whole purpose of getting married. Perhaps that's why I'm still single for now and just enjoying the freedom I have when I can.
Right.
But, you know, marriage is definitely important. And, you know, I don't want to admit this, but I've seen this, I've experienced this indirectly. Many people fight in marriage because of money. So I think money is a big issue.
Oh, definitely.
But so, like dealing it before marriage can be a very good option.
Now, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, it's a smart way to navigate things. You asked me earlier if I've ever written one myself. I didn't write it, you know, it wasn't like a premarital thing or really about the money itself. But I want to talk about it because I brought it right here.
Oh, whoa,
That is legit.
It's like a legit contract.
It's in English and it's in Korean. I hope people can't really
Zoom
read
in. I'm
into
gonna
it.
zoom
Please
in.
don't
Everyone's
zoom
gonna
in. So the focus wasn't really the property or like the asset aspect to it because we didn't have that much money to start with. And I'm pretty sure I never really have to use this in a legal way. And like we were mentioning, I can't use this in a legal way. But this mostly consists of when I was really angry, the conditions that I've laid out for my husband. I mean, because we talk about deal breakers a lot in marriage, and I think some of these were kind of deal breakers that I saw during the marriage, and I said, if you do this again, I can't guarantee that I'll stay with you. And it consists of breaking traffic laws because I like it when, you know, driving safely, and I'm almost to a point like too much of a goody two shoes, so kind of consists of that, like health issues like smoking and things like that. Smoking is a kind of a big deal breaker for me, so that was a huge thing. But a lot of it is really vague. I don't think I could ever use this in a legal way because of that. But it says things like, I'm gonna read number 5. I will listen to my wife's opinions about when I overwork myself to help others.
Okay.
So it's very specific,
Wow.
right? So it's lovely when somebody has a great heart, but
Right.
when they prioritize other people so much to the point their body starts to, you know, break down, I feel like I don't know if I can build a life with that kind of attitude.
I would have to say this is not the temporary prenup I was thinking about.
It's not. It's really not. It's just
But I think you showed us a very good example of how millennial and Gen Z couples out there are more accustomed to writing contracts, whether it involves like abiding to traffic laws or make sure not to overwork yourself and better communication. I
Yep.
think that is a growing trend among our generation. And also, I'm quite curious as to find out more about the legalities involved with signing these types of contracts before marriage. And to find out more about that, we're now going to include a family attorney in our talks. So stay with us for our live interview. We're now going to include a family attorney in our talks. It's Chun Sumi. Great to have you back on our show, Sumi.
Hello.
Hello, this generation. How are you?
Nice to have you back. So, Sumi, as usual, I'd like to ask you the first question. Because you're a family attorney, I'm quite curious as to whether you've actually seen more of your clients ask for legal advice before signing a prenup. And if so, why do you think more millennial and Gen Z couples are doing this?
I think it's because millennials are more practical and stable than other generations, and they value happiness in the present over the future. They also have a high expectation for themselves because they are more educated and socially diverse than their parents, I think. But the global economic downturn and the coronavirus has created a number of challenges for the millennials, and this has affected their marriages. Especially in the case of Millennial and Generation Z, they tend to manage their own property and income even after marriage. And they thought they wanted to sign a prenup in advance to reduce disputes with each other.
Now, before we go on to the second question, Sumi, I have a question. Like, did any of your clients come up with you with contracts like Niall showed us here in the studio?
Do you see my contract just now?
Yeah, it's my first time. Show the prenup, the kind of detail, the small
Signed Korean
the
and in
property
English.
and the real estate that could be possible, but include the smoke. It's very rare, the rare case to me. So that's very interesting. How amazing she is, I think.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. I'm so flattered. I don't know if this is a good thing, but I just want to ask, because Kyun briefly mentioned that most prenups in Korea don't have any legal force. You just mentioned that if this were in the States, it might work. But does this mean that we can change the clauses of a prenup after marriage and it still might help us?
That both true and false in some ways. Under the Korean family law, the legal effect of prenup is limited. The prenup is called the couple property contract under the Korean family law, and it has the effect of separating the unique property that each had before marriage registration from the joint property of the couple. However, even if the prenup is signed, the court does not absolutely recognize the effect in case of divorce. As Kyun mentioned to us, the prenup can be used as important evidence in divorce trials. This is why it's a good idea to specify the property of the husband and wife in detail, and in order to distinguish between them. In the end, when writing the prenuptial agreement, it is important to make sure that each section is as clear and specific as possible to prevent potential confusion and disputes in the future.
Okay, is there any way to ensure that both parties do comply once signing it? And what's the best way to write a prenup?
In the case of divorce under the prenup, it is necessary to determine the specific division of the property to be held as their property. And in the case of real estate, it is desirable to register above. The best thing is to have a harmonious marriage without divorce. But in case of divorce, it is recommended to prepare a marriage contract and have it notarized at the notary office before filing for divorce. Please find me if you have any difficulties regarding the prenup.
All right, but let's all hope for that harmonious marriage. Thank you so much, Sumi. It was a pleasure talking to you again today.
Thank you.
All right. Now, as a final note, how would you guys like to see this prenup trend, or I would just like to say pre-marriage contracts, basically, go on from here now in our generation?
You know, it's a very tough question, but if I have like this ideal type of, I guess, prenup concept, if I meet someone, I'm not gonna ask them personal questions like, how much do your parents own? Like, how many houses do they have? Or how much do you earn? What's your annual salary? But I don't think if I do find out after I, devote myself to getting married to this person, I don't think it would change my feelings towards that person just because of how much money she has, how much money that I'll end up getting if I do get divorced. Because I think a lot of people abuse this kind of the whole marriage thing because after finding out how much the other person actually had, they thought, I can just live with that person for a few years and then legally take half of their assets. So as long as you don't really abuse it, and like what the lawyer said, if you can live a harmonious life without thinking too much about these things. But also our generation, we're very practical, pragmatic, and we like to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario. And like also we are the YOLO generation.
We are.
I mean, you can get divorced and get married again. So I don't think it's just like, don't tie yourself too much to just one type of love. You can always have a diverse kind of life, so just enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, what about you now?
I know I feel like I'm always the super idealist person at the end of the show, but ideally you want somebody who would give 50% in and the other person to give 50% in, so that it really is 50-50, and maybe by the time you do decide to unfortunately split ways, that you wouldn't feel so robbed of somebody taking 50% of something that you built together, like whether financially or just helping out in the home, emotionally. Everybody should be giving their best at a marriage, and hopefully if you do have two people giving the best at the marriage, people won't get divorced.
Exactly.
So I just want everybody to be in healthy marriages if you are in it, because divorces are not easy.
It's not easy.
I don't know, but
the legal procedure is too tough.
Yeah,
exactly. But I might be a bit more idealistic than you. I think people should give in their 100 each and then bring 200 on the table. And I think this episode, though we're not trying to promote marriage or say everyone needs to get married, as you mentioned, Kyun, there's so many different types of relationships out there. But if you do decide to commit to marriage, I personally think that you need to remember the sanctity of it, and that hopefully, though it's a very pragmatic way to sign off these contracts and stuff like that, it's also always important to understand that you need to be bringing as much to the table as the other person is.
Exactly.
I'm gonna bring in 200%.
200%.
Wow.
Awesome. Now, until then, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Nalsong
No problem.
and Park Ki-hoon.
Always a pleasure.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.